how we save democracy by ending the filibuster. Tonight's conversation is hosted by Let New York Vote, Common Cause New York, Indivisible Nation BK, Brooklyn in the house, True Blue New York, Empire State Indivisible, and CPD Action. And we want to give a special shout out to our panelists, and I would call them co-conspirators in our vision for a free and a just country, the Working Families Party, and of course, our affiliate, the New Georgia Project. So we have a high task today because we both want to give folks an understanding and build a shared grounding of the history of the filibuster and the way that it has been used to disenfranchise our people and to advance white supremacy. And we want to really lean in to our vision of protecting and expanding democracy all across this country. This is not just about partisan politics or about an individual piece of legislation. It is about striking a blow to what has been more than a 6-decade-long advancement of and protection, right? System of protection of white supremacy. And so, you know, I often say that if white supremacy is a noose around the neck of Black and Indigenous and Latinx and Asian and other people of color, then it is a knife in the back of struggling white communities all across this country. It is a knife in the back of the working class, no matter what race folks are. And you know, here is a moment to understand that while there were origins of the filibuster, the way, and those origins were racist and rooted in Jim Crow, right? The way that it has shifted and changed under Mitch McConnell really isn't just about you know, harming communities of color, but it is harming all of us, right? The things that we want to see change in our country, whether it is making sure everybody has access to healthcare, making sure that people can deal with this housing crisis, you know, building an economy that works for everyone, or at the very least, making sure that we raise the minimum wage so that nobody is working a poverty wage in this country. These issues affect all of us, regardless of our race. But the filibuster and its use to maintain white supremacy is therefore harming us all. So we are in a moment in which we need to understand what the filibuster is, where it came from, and why it exists in the way it does. And we need to be staunch and unapologetic advocates for our democracy and for a democracy that represents the people. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get into our program. And I am so grateful to be joined by my comrade, the director of the Working Families Party, Maurice Mitchell, who's going to share and help us trace this racist history of the filibuster.
Well, thank you so much, Jen. Appreciate you and your leadership. So grateful to be on a call with people I truly consider friends. My sister Nsé, Susan, who I've known for years. Just really excited to be part of this conversation. Looking forward to Adam. So just, again, thank you so much. And thank you for CPD for creating this space. So good evening, everyone. Again, my name is Maurice Mitchell. I'm the National Director of the Working Families Party. And it's really good to be in community with you. Now, in November, Black folks and other people of color went out en masse, and particularly to send Joe Biden to the White House. And I always stress that we didn't send Joe Biden to the White House simply because we wanted a change of the residency in the White House. It's because we wanted a change in our material conditions, right? So in January, largely powered by Black voters and other voters of color, in support of a Biden agenda, a transformative Biden agenda, Georgia gave the Democratic Party what it asked for, control of the Senate, and a trifecta control in our government. So Joe Biden, the head of the Democratic Party, if you remember, pledged to have the backs of the Black community. Everything you hear from myself and other panelists regarding federal legislation must be weighed against that very promise. Joe Biden has often been referred to as an institutionalist when it comes to the Senate. And after many decades in the Senate, it's fair that he would hold the norms of the institution close to his heart, sure. However, his promise to have the backs of the Black community and his adoration for Senate norms cannot coexist. And because of that promise that he made, he cannot have our backs and back the filibuster at the same time. Something has to give, and it won't be us, right? So we have to be really clear about that. The filibuster and maintaining the filibuster is the difference between us seeing justice and not. This also isn't a both sides issue, because we've heard people talk about this as a both sides issue. The preservation of the filibuster plus a simple majority allows the GOP, and we've seen this, to pass the bulk of their agenda. Let's think about what the GOP agenda generally is: tax cuts and other spending measures. That only requires 50 or 51 votes, 50 votes plus the vice president, right? Fealty to the corporate agenda doesn't require 60 votes, right? So, and it also doesn't mean that they have to ever compromise with Democrats. So this idea that this is a both sides thing, no, their agenda is designed for the rules of the Senate as it is. And our agenda is designed for the rules of the Senate to be a barrier to be able to pass things. So Democrats, on the other hand, cannot advance any civil rights or social justice legislation with the filibuster in place, because getting 10 GOP senators to hand Democrats a victory on anything is untenable. And everybody here knows that. It's like a ludicrous idea that you'd be able to get 10 GOP senators to do anything, even if it's common sense, even if a majority of people agree. Which brings us to the past. The one issue for which the filibuster proved a major obstacle in previous decades was civil rights legislation. From the late 1920s through the 1960s, the filibuster was primarily used by Southern segregationists in the Senate to block legislation that would have protected civil rights. Now, this means everything from anti-lynching bills to bills prohibiting poll taxes, bills prohibiting discrimination in employment, housing, and voting, right? So these anti-civil rights filibusters were often justified with, I'm going to quote now, sort of inflated rhetoric about an alleged Senate tradition, we're hearing that again, of respecting minority rights, we're hearing that again, and the value of extending debate on issues of great importance. So we hear debate, we hear tradition, we hear minority rights. That's code for Jim Crow. Let's be super clear about that. Now, that rhetoric that conservatives used during that time was ultimately about preventing the rights of people like me to be able to be full human beings in this country. Some of the most notorious filibusters in American history were against the Civil Rights Act of 1957 and 1964. And during the filibuster of the 57 Civil Rights Act, Senator Strom Thurmond, right? Folks remember him? He set a record by holding the Senate floor continuously for 24 hours and 18 minutes. 7 years later, the ultimately unsuccessful effort to obstruct the Civil Rights Act of 64 lasted a total of 74 days and received major ongoing news coverage. That coverage ultimately helped to galvanize the public and break through the Southern opposition to civil rights. Now, Joe Biden came into office having to immediately get to work on a global pandemic. The passage of the relief package, to me, signals a willingness to go big on policies that meet crises at scale. It wasn't perfect, but there's a lot of really amazing things, and the scale of it is on a scale that we probably couldn't have imagined months ago. Now, we cannot let up on the need for Congress to deliver on voting rights. Let's have them keep that same energy as it relates to voting rights. The relief package is proof to me of what Congress can do when they're pushed. It's also a reminder that we expect the president and Senate Democrats to use every single tool in the toolbox to advance their agenda and to advance social justice, including eliminating the filibuster, which we consider a relic of Jim Crow. Now, I want to be clear. Voting rights were always at a crisis point. When we see Black folks and other communities of color triumph over ridiculously long lines, polling places that don't have enough functional voting machines or having to wait hours after polls close to cast a vote. We need to call it what it is. It's not a celebration, right? It is a willful, intentional, institutional failure to suppress our vote. And it just shows how resilient we are, that we overcome those failures and those barriers. So for every person who waits in line, there's one or more person who has to be at work. People who have kids or relatives they have to take care of. So we cannot condition Black folks that a ridiculous effort is needed every 2 or 4 years simply to exercise our constitutional right and to continually save this country from itself. If Joe Biden and the Democratic Party are interested in having the backs of Black folks, it's time to act. In Republican-held legislatures across the country, there are more than 240 bills moving in 43 states that would severely restrict action to the ballot. And they aren't even trying to hide it. It's blatant. It's not about integrity. It's about stopping Democratic voters from voting, period. They are openly saying it. In the Supreme Court, Justice Amy Coney Barrett asked a GOP attorney what the interest was in keeping a provision that discriminates against minority voters. The attorney said, I'm quoting, because it puts us at a competitive disadvantage relative to Democrats. Politics is a zero-sum game, and every extra vote they get through, unlawful interpretation of Section 2, they said, hurts us. It's the difference between winning an election 50 by 49 and losing an election by 51 to 50. So ultimately, what they're saying is we need to steal every vote we can in order to maintain power. Period. They're saying it. So in Georgia, a bill that, and I'm so happy that Nsé is here to provide some more context around this, that only a Jim Crow-loving legislator would admire, passed through both chambers. We saw it, many of us saw it from TV. Nsé, I'm sure, saw the horror up close. This is happening in real time. And look, this is about power and white supremacy. This is about the confluence of corporate power, white supremacy, and maintaining the power of the far right, period. So Democrats have a clear choice. All it takes to eliminate the filibuster is 51 votes. If Democratic senators care about we the people and the will of the people, and if Joe Biden and the Democrats really believe in backing Black folks and working folks and other folks, then it's time that they fulfill their promises, the promises that they made to our people. After our people delivered votes in November and in January that pulled our country from the brink, it's time that they eliminate the filibuster. Thank you.
Thank you, Maurice. Thank you so much for that incredible history. I see in the chat a question, which is, can we give a quick definition of filibuster? What does it mean? And the first filibuster occurred in 1837, and the term became popularized in around 1850. And the way it was described at the time is the practice of giving a long speech to delay a vote, right? And so the primary goal, right, at least at the time it was described, was about delaying a particular vote, not necessarily about defeating every piece of policy or legislation the opposition party has. But throughout the history in the 20s, the 30s, all the way up through the civil rights movement, the filibuster was primarily used to block civil rights legislation, as Maurice said. And so it really is inextricably linked to anti-Blackness and white supremacy in our country. But here's the kicker, is it goes further. And so under Mitch McConnell, the filibuster was not only seen as a way to slow racial progress, right, in this country and racial equity in this country, which is something, a lot of people got behind, but it began to be used as a way to prevent any progress whatsoever on any issue, from Republicans to Democrats. And so, the commitment from the Republican leadership, Mitch McConnell, Lindsey Graham, and others, right, is that we will not allow anything to successfully pass that's going to benefit the American people. And so when we talk about this knife in the back of struggling white communities, that's what we mean, because we know that, for example, raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour is incredibly popular among people in both parties, a ballot initiative that provided direct democracy to voters in Florida, for example, passed overwhelmingly, even as the Senate continues to refuse to take up raising the minimum wage. When we talk about how do we deal with our environment and climate catastrophes, the American people, by and large, are aligned with each other, but we do not have the power to defeat those who represent the interests of corporations who continue to benefit from extraction and from these environmental harms. And so the filibuster really is what is standing in the way of us building a country in which all of us are free to thrive. And we see this dynamic of standing in the way of progress and of not governing for the people, but instead on behalf of the moneyed elite, really clearly happening in Georgia. And so I want to shift over to to Nsé, who I think needs very few introductions, because if you have cable news, you have seen her everywhere, thankfully. But I think Nsé, all of us have been watching with a broken heart as those who did everything that they were told to do to save and protect our democracy are now the target of an intense and ongoing and hateful campaign to deny them the fruits of their labor. So we would love to hear you talk about what's happening in Georgia, and in particular, what you think needs to happen at the federal level in order to ensure that we continue to protect our democracy.
Peace, everyone. Thank you. I would argue that we continue to be targets of the sort of anti-progress defenders of the status quo, cadre of would-be authoritarians who are working really hard to fight the future. That's how I would characterize the Georgia Republican Party. So boom, here we are. Last Thursday, Governor Brian Kemp, our asterisk governor, behind closed doors and with 6 other dwarfs, signed probably one of the most aggressive anti-voting bills that we've seen in generations, all under the photo of a plantation called the Callaway Plantation, where hundreds of people were forcibly held in bondage and enslaved, building white wealth and contributing to what is now the sort of landed rural elite in a place like Georgia. History was made in November of 2020 when Georgia voters turned out in historic numbers to participate in our elections. Nearly 5 million people showed up to vote, which is a huge deal, given what has been characterized and framed as voter apathy, particularly in the early days when the New Georgia Project just began and was getting off the ground. There were tons of questions, right? Why is it that in a place like Georgia, which seemingly has decent politics in the cities around the state, it is going to be the first state in the Deep South with a white minority? So people of color are going to make up the majority of the residents. That why are our politics not closer to California than they are to Texas, to majority people of color states currently in our state? And the answer is voter suppression. We used to get a lot of questions about what can we do to inspire young Black people to vote and participate in our elections? What is it about the Black electorate? Why don't they show up to vote? Latinos and Asian Americans are becoming citizens. Asian Americans are the largest growing group in the state. What is it about these groups that they are not participating in our elections at rates of white Georgians? And we now know with absolute certainty that Georgia has a long and a recent history of voter suppression. And while we don't force voters to count the number of jelly beans that are in a jar before they are allowed to register to vote or to actually vote, that our sort of race neutral on its face approach to voter suppression is way more insidious and way more harmful. So there are a number of schemes and tricks that existed on the county level and at the state level that allowed, quite frankly, white conservatives to control the outcome of our elections. And we knew that until we were able to change our state leadership and our county leadership, that the only way that we could ensure that the will of the people was reflected in the results of our elections was to have overwhelming participation and overwhelming turnout because of how Georgia's elections get managed. So we fast forward, in November election, we have historic participation. There's a president of the United States who refuses to accept that he is lost. He is pushing harmful, racist propaganda about widespread voter fraud, even down to the fact that he was on a recorded line. He knew he was being recorded, bullying our Secretary of State and asking him to find 11,000 votes to overcome the results of the election, hitting our Secretary of State with his best, please, baby, 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 please, find 11,000 votes. I'm sure you can. And to his credit, in this moment, Georgia's Secretary of State refused to participate in this criminal conspiracy to steal an election. People should know that there were 3 recounts in our state, and the 0.25% margin between President Biden and President Trump withstood 3 Republican-controlled recounts of our elections. And so the idea that, what would come later, these over 50 bills designed to attack our attack our election system was designed to restore sort of faith or confidence in the results of our elections is a big old fat nasty lie. 9 weeks between the November general election and the January runoff. And there was a lot of hand-wringing and a lot of social media political scientists telling us that Republicans have a structural advantage, and therefore you all are not likely to see the same results or the same level of participation by young people and by Black voters and by Asian American voters in the January runoffs. That, historically, Black people don't show up, Latinos are not citizens, Asian Americans are secret conservatives, young people are unreliable, and women, particularly white women, lie to pollsters. They end up eventually voting like their husbands and their fathers. Also called conventional political wisdom that was supposed to determine the outcome of the elections. And what we all know now is that not only did Georgia voters show up in November in historic numbers, but they did the same thing in the January runoffs. And Reverend, now Senator Warnock and Ossoff, Senator Ossoff, beat Joe Biden's margin by a considerable amount. And 80% of the Georgians who showed up in the November election showed up again to vote in January. And so because of that, the whitelash has been severe. And that is what we are dealing with. So a bill was passed in Georgia that essentially, one, we're calling it the Kinkos Provision, where in order to request an absentee ballot, you have to submit a photocopy of your ID. In order to submit an absentee ballot, you have to submit a photocopy of your ID. Drop boxes will no longer be located outside of polling locations, that they will be inside, and voters don't have access to drop boxes after 5 p.m. p.m. I feel like that's particularly egregious because when we think about the regular general commercial uses of drop boxes, is to give customers access to the business outside of working hours. So working people who get off of work at 5 p.m. will not have access to the drop boxes because they will be in locked buildings and that you won't have access after 5 p.m. Much has been written about and said about the NGP provision, which is the idea that if we hand out water and pizza and portable cell phone chargers and lawn chairs, which is what we are known for, or one of the things that we're known for during early voting and on election day, that you'll be subject to criminal charges. And so, churches and synagogues and the Boy Scouts and the Girl Scouts and grassroots organizations like NGP will now have to face and figure out ways to defend ourselves from criminal charges because of the recent provisions that were passed in Georgia. And then one of the most egregious sections is that they've essentially fired Georgia's Secretary of State. So it's not bad enough that the former president of the United States, Donald Trump, has recruited Republicans to primary the current Secretary of State. But they also got the Republicans in the Georgia State Legislature to strip him of the majority of his roles and responsibilities as Georgia's chief elections officer. They've also passed provisions that will allow the Republican-led legislature to take over county boards of elections and fire county election supervisors who they feel are not doing a good job. And so we absolutely have to pass HR 1 and HR 4. I'm talking about to you all this evening about Georgia because it's the state that I know the most about. But the truth of the matter is that there are 43 states that are currently deliberating anti-voting bills, attacking voter ID or making voter ID requirements, trying to disenfranchise formerly incarcerated folks, people who have paid their debts to society, all manners of attacks on vote by mail, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so Georgia is not alone. I want you all to hear me when I say this. This is the single unifying organizing issue for the right in this moment. I know these jokers in the Georgia State Legislature, they did not write 50 bills to attack voting, that they got support from the American Legislative Exchange Council and all kinds of support from Heritage Foundation and Heritage Action. So we are looking at a well-funded and extraordinarily organized, highly coordinated effort to attack our democracy, to attack our elections, and to remove the mechanism that we have in order to elect accountable leadership who will go to Washington, D.C., or who will go to our respective state capitals and do the people's work, right? Like, this is what they are unifying around. They can't agree on anything else but attacking our democracy and attacking the freedom to vote. And so we filed a lawsuit minutes after our asterisk governor signed the bill into law. And that's because while HR 1 is extraordinary in setting a federal standard for elections, which we absolutely need in this country, there are definitely some provisions that HR 1 doesn't address, which we are attempting to get addressed in Congress. And then HR 4 just says that states need to get pre-clearance, that if they have aims or desires to make it more difficult to vote or to change election laws, that they must get it pre-cleared by the Department of Justice or by a federal judge. And so while the door has been closed, our legislative session ends tomorrow. And so that's why they were rushing so quickly. We have a part-time legislature. They only work for 40 days. While the door is closed to do anything about the Georgia law, it's not too late to fight back and push in the 42 other states. And I'm not talking about just in the South, right? We're talking about New York, New Jersey, California has their own anti-voting provisions, Iowa, Illinois, all across the country. 43 states have anti-voting bills that are being deliberated right now. And so 43 lawsuits can absolutely be filed, but the more efficient way to stop this madness and again, set a federal standard for elections is to pass HR 1 and HR 4. We absolutely need it. It has to happen.
Thank you so much, Nsé. And thank you for all of the work that you and your folks are leading on the ground. You know, it is important to understand, right, how all of these attacks on democracy and all of these attacks on delivering for the people are interconnected. And so we can't just keep our eye on the federal legislation, and we can't just, you know, only talk about the filibuster. We have to understand how this disenfranchisement is moving on the ground and how it's connected to our broader federal goals, right? The antidote to the voter suppression and the other forms of oppression we're seeing, not just in Georgia, but as Nsé mentioned, in 43 other states across the country, is the For the People Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. But we can't pass those critical and widely popular pieces of legislation if the filibuster remains. And so the antidote, the answer here is that Schumer must act. Is that those of us who maybe grew up on Mr. Smith Goes to Washington and, you know, have reverence for that, you know, beautiful sort of scene in which he continues to filibuster all night, or maybe some of us are from Texas and we have reverence for what Wendy Davis did when she stood on her feet to fight abortion bills. We have to get comfortable with the uncomfortable reality that these laws, which sometimes we romanticize or sometimes play well in Hollywood movies, that these laws have a specific racist intent that is not just harming people of color, that's harming all of us. And so we're going to get to, in just a few minutes, why we thought it was really critical to focus on voting rights as a way to advance our desire to end the filibuster. Adam, who's going to talk in a few minutes, I think is going to share some insight about how to influence Senator Schumer. But what we know is that we need politicians to act, and for them to act, we have to begin to break down the romanticizing of the filibuster and actually speak to its intent and impact. And, you know, along that note, right, you know, I see there was a comment about whitelash, right, in the chat. And I want to again share that whitelash is an actual term, a specific term that describes the phenomena that has happened in every instance, whether at the state level or the federal level, in which there has been legislative advancement in civil rights. So we can see that after the Fair Housing Act, we can see it after local open housing ordinances or busing ordinances. Whitelash is a specific phenomenon in which, you know, primarily white folks engage in backlash activity and organizing against racial progress, right? Against the progress that was advanced. And there's great thinking and great reading about whitelash from Ibram X. Kendi and others. Happy to throw some of that in the chat for folks. But again, we cannot let terms make us uncomfortable with the reality of what is happening. And the reality of what's happening is that people who are harmed by white folks, who are harmed by the filibuster and who will be harmed by these voting right restrictions are being organized to support them along racial identity and are being organized to support them through white supremacy. And so we have to name it and confront it and not be afraid of it and lean into the organizing against it. So right now, what we're going to do is give you a tool for that, right? We want everybody to understand and share the history. So we're getting ready to show a video. Shout out to our innovations team at CPD and our democracy team at CPD and our research team who has helped to put together this video. We're going to show a video about the history of the filibuster. And this video is available to the folks on this call for you to use in your networks, as well as for you to use in their own development of your language and understanding about why we need to call white supremacy as it relates to the filibuster. So we'll show this video and then we're going to go over to Adam, who's going to really give us like the in-depth. I see people asking for it in the chat. I promise you it's coming, but we're going to get an in-depth state of play on where the Senate is at and what are the procedures that we need to have in order to end the filibuster. So let's start with the video and then we'll go to Adam next.
Since its inception, the filibuster has been used by white conservatives to protect their power and to block progress. Headed by this guy, John C. Calhoun, founding father of the Confederacy, who was joined by Southern senators who believed slavery improved the lives of enslaved Black people. And they used the filibuster in the 1800s to help preserve slavery. From the late 1920s through the 1960s, the filibuster was primarily used by Southern senators to block civil rights legislation, including anti-lynching bills, bills prohibiting poll taxes, and bills prohibiting discrimination in voting, housing, and employment. Southern senators successfully blocked the passage of any anti-lynching legislation, which actually had majority support, including the South, and was supported by both parties. They claimed they were defending minority rights. During this time, nearly 200 anti-lynching bills were blocked by the filibuster. Conservative senators filibustered every civil rights bill that came before Congress, from the Reconstruction era to 1964, when the Lyndon B. Johnson administration put together a supermajority to overcome a filibuster of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 that had lasted 74 days.
Those words are a promise to every citizen that he shall share in the dignity of man. This dignity cannot be found.
Since the 1970s, political changes we the people have demanded, like wage equality, health care, climate change, and immigration reform, have been caught through this pattern of using the filibuster in the modern era.
So I would call on all 46 Republicans to unite, to stand together and to vote against cloture on the bill on Friday or Saturday.
None of those things are going to pass the Senate. They won't even be voted on. So think of me as the Grim Reaper.
McConnell has utilized it as a method of mass obstruction during the Obama years, and he'll do it again to grind President Biden's agenda to halt and to prevent this new Congress from passing progressive legislation.
All time for debate has expired.
The only way to move meaningful policy through Congress in this term is to eliminate this relic of our white supremacist past, and to use our Senate majority to serve our communities. By eliminating the filibuster, we will once again be able to pass bills with majority support as opposed to the 60 votes needed to overcome the filibuster. We're asking Democratic leadership in the Senate to seize this moment. Sign our petition to urge senators today to abolish the filibuster.
So incredibly powerful. Again, this video is available for folks to use in their own popular education and in your own organizing work to help folks understand the history of the filibuster. The bottom line here, folks, is that Schumer must act. Republicans have made their decision. Mitch McConnell is 100% clear that his agenda is to not allow the most popular pieces of legislation that will have a material benefit to people's lives all across this country to advance or to even get a vote in the Senate. And we cannot allow that. We cannot allow the Democratic majority to just accept or to continue to believe that both sides are interested in compromise and debate. And so what we're asking folks to do is A, sign the petition, which you can find at the link of the video or link to the video. And B, we are asking you to contact Leader Schumer, to contact him now. There's going to be a link in the chat to let him know that this is the number one issue. This is the key, the gateway to all of the pieces of policy that we care so deeply about. So with that, I'm going to transition over to Adam Jentleson, who is going to provide us with a state of play in the Senate and really to help us dig into, I see a lot of questions for you, Adam, in the chat. Help us dig into what is the procedural path to ending the filibuster.
Definitely. And thank you so much, Jen. It's such an honor to be here with you and this incredible group. Thank you for all of your work. Thank you for delivering the majority in Georgia. It's impossible to overstate how important that was for the country. Just thinking about where we'd be right now if Mitch McConnell was still majority leader is a very depressing thought. So it's really a privilege and an honor to be here speaking to you tonight. So state of play. So I think that we're actually in better shape than I sort of had hoped we would be. This is an issue I've been working on for some time. I was with Senator Harry Reid back in 2013 when Senator Reid did a similar type of filibuster reform for nominations to get some of President Obama's judicial nominees and other cabinet nominees through over Republican obstruction. And I would say that compared to that time in 2013, we are running a little bit ahead of schedule here, and that's a very good thing and a testament to the work of people on this call and folks out there on the ground who are raising this issue that is sort of an obscure quirk of Senate procedure to the national level and having it be debated in the national conversation to the way it is today. So that's good. I think that we've seen, I think most of the Democratic caucus is in favor of reform. That's a very positive development. That is, even a few years ago, they were expressing reticence to do any kind of reform. Just 2 years ago, 17 Democratic senators signed on to a letter saying they would never do any reform. So the fact that we're sort of down to a few recalcitrants at this point is a very positive thing and shows a lot of progress. But we do have a few recalcitrants and we need every single Democrat on board. The good news about this situation is that you can eliminate the filibuster or reform it or really do anything you want with a simple majority, as Maurice said at the beginning. All you need are 50 votes plus the vice president to break a tie. So that's the good news. The other piece of good news is we have 50 Democrats in the Senate. The bad news is that not all of them want to do filibuster reform. But I think that among the staunchest holdouts, I would say Senator Manchin of West Virginia, Senator Sinema of Arizona are the two firmest. You've already seen Manchin shift a little bit. He's endorsed the idea of doing some kind of a reform. What he has endorsed is a return to the talking filibuster, which is what Maurice was talking about earlier with, senators holding the floor, and what Jen was talking about with the, Mr. Smith goes to Washington, that we think of a senator holding the floor, giving a long speech. Going back to a talking filibuster would be a step in the right direction because any kind of reform is good. And the way these things often transpire is that once you start doing reform, it's sort of a Rubicon effect where you cross that Rubicon and you keep going, because once you've crossed it, you get all the negative incoming, so you might as well keep going to get the upside of actually being able to pass things. But the problem with the talking filibuster by itself is that it has proven very effective at stopping bills in the past, in particular civil rights bills. It was the talking filibuster that blocked civil rights bills, as we just saw in the video, for nearly 100 years from the end of Reconstruction until they were finally able to overcome a filibuster in 1964. So it's not just, the way to think about it is it's not just one person holding the floor. You can coordinate with other people. So, there were famous filibusters like Strom Thurmond's 24-hour filibuster against the 1957 Civil Rights Bill. That took a day, but the really effective ones were the ones where Southern white supremacist senators would coordinate with each other. So you'd have 20 or so senators who could each go on for an unlimited amount of time. And we have those coordinated filibusters, they can go on basically indefinitely and be very effective at blocking bills. So that type of reform that Manchin has endorsed, you also saw President Biden even shift in that direction, probably won't be enough at the end of the day to get the HR 1 passed or the John Lewis Voting Rights Act passed. We're going to need to go further. But I would say that, starting to do reform is a step in the right direction. Folks in the chat are saying, what are we going to do if we can't get Manchin and Sinema? I would say this is a process, and you get them for the first thing, and then you get them for the next thing, and then you keep going. Manchin does not necessarily have a lot of built-in incentives for his own political, personal incentives for passing something like HR 1 or the Voting Rights Act. I can't say that it seems that voting rights is a top issue for him. However, there are other types of self-interested appeals for Senator Manchin. Staying in the majority, for instance, would be dramatically to Senator Manchin's benefit. He's currently the chair of the Energy Committee. And if Democrats lose the majority in 2022, as we could by losing just one seat, Senator Manchin will no longer be the chair, and Democrats won't be in the majority, and he will be much less powerful. There are many things that benefit West Virginia that can pass if we get rid of the filibuster, that can't pass if we keep it. So there are many ways to get Senator Manchin. I think keeping the pressure on him is very key. He's already shifted. He shifted more than I expected he would shift by this time. So that's very positive. Senator Sinema is in a similar place. She hasn't shifted at all. However, I think that she is even more vulnerable to pressure from the left than Senator Manchin. Arizona is not a state where she can claim to be the only Democrat who can win and hold that seat. You've got Democrats who can win statewide. You've got a very strong progressive infrastructure there. I think a lot of pressure can be brought to bear on her to shift. I think she's too far out to the right, and she needs to recalibrate at this point. I wouldn't be surprised if you saw at least a little bit of shift from her in the coming days and weeks. So all that is to say, while you see these statements from Manchin and Sinema sometimes saying we're not going to do reform, Joe Manchin says never. What don't you understand about never? He said never, and then a few days later he shifted. So keep the faith. There's been a tremendous amount of progress. Compared to where we were in 2013, we are much farther ahead now than we were then, and we got it done in 2013. So it can be discouraging to see those headlines, and the media likes to play up, the extent to which they're still standing firm on their anti-filibuster stances. But the work that you all have done, the work has made a tremendous impact already. You never get the votes for something like this until the day you actually vote. So you probably won't even see Manchin shift for good until the very end. But it is very, very clear that the pressure is working. And the thing I would say for Senator Schumer is that I think that in his heart of hearts, he does sort of want to make progress here. I think that he knows that he can't be an effective majority leader if the filibuster remains in place. I think he has ambitions to be like a Lyndon Johnson majority leader and to get great things done. And he knows that that's never going to happen if the filibuster remains in place. However, I think that the caucus does need a heightened sense of urgency. It's not just a question of whether we do this, it's a question of when. If you don't get filibuster reform passed soon, and by soon I mean the summer or Labor Day at the latest, then you start to, even if you pass things like HR 1, it's not clear they will be able to go into effect before 2022. Certainly the anti-gerrymandering provisions of HR 1 would not be able to go into effect to prevent some of the worst gerrymandering that could take place. So if you want HR 1 to go into effect and go into effect in enough time to actually have an impact on the 2022 election cycle and help fight voter suppression in that cycle, it's not just a question of getting it done sometime in the next year or so, it's a question of getting it done immediately. So even though I think the caucus is generally headed in the right direction, I think there needs to be a heightened sense of urgency. You're going to see a period in the next few weeks where bills are brought to the floor. Popular things, probably S1, the Senate version of HR 1, the For the People Act, will be brought to the floor. They'll get blocked by Republicans. And then I think Democrats, and some of them want to say, okay, well, we'll put on a little show here. We'll let some of these bills get blocked by Republicans, And then we're going to shift over to infrastructure and do that for the rest of the summer and potentially into the fall. And then maybe we'll come back to filibuster reform and voting rights sometime in the fall, maybe around Thanksgiving. That would be a major problem. First of all, you never know how much momentum you're going to lose in that period of time. We've got momentum now, and every rule of how change works, as you all well know, says go with your momentum and keep going while you have it. You never know what can transpire over those months. Biden could lose political capital. We could lose the majority for some unknown reason. We have a 1-seat majority that's very, very slim. I see what's going on in California with the recall efforts, and it's giving me flashbacks to Massachusetts in 2009 when Senator Kennedy passed away, and we all thought, oh, that seat is safe. And of course, Scott Brown won it over everybody's expectations. So you literally never know what's going to happen. So any delay is bad. So I think I'll close with this thought and then take your questions. And I would just say that in this period where Democrats are going to put things on the floor and get them blocked, I think a lot of the grassroots pressure that can be brought to bear can say, what are you waiting for? Just do it now. Don't shift over to infrastructure and don't go take the summer doing something else. Republicans are going to block everything you bring to the floor. They're going to block voting rights in the For the People Act. So what are you waiting for? Reform the filibuster, abolish the filibuster, and pass these things now instead of waiting. There's nothing more we need to see. We know Republicans want to keep this tool. It is a tool that advantages their side way more than it advantages our side. That's why they love it so much. It has this history of white supremacy that we've talked about, but it continues to advantage the forces of the status quo and entrench corporate power today. So this isn't just an ancient history. This is very much a present factor today. So what are you waiting for? Just get it done, get rid of it, and let's get on with passing the things that we need to improve our communities, improve our material conditions, as Maurice started the call by saying. So with that, I will pause and happy to take questions or turn it over to anybody else as you guys see fit.
Thank you so much, Adam. We are running up close to the end time here. So I will just pull out a few things from the chat that folks were sharing. First of all, on Senator Schumer's positioning, publicly what Senator Schumer has indicated is a willingness to address the filibuster, in a spectrum from reform to ending it. He, has in meetings with multiple different sort of organizing configurations has shared that he feels as though there is one shot at this and that he doesn't want to move prematurely and lose our one shot. So I think to Adam's point, our analysis about the need to move quickly so that we can deliver for the American people ahead of the midterms, and Senator Schumer's analysis about the needing to move slowly and deliberately and to force Republicans to act unreasonably multiple times before we move are misaligned. And so one of the ways that we, the first analysis here is anything that is going to happen in terms of ending the filibuster or reforming it will need to happen because Senator Schumer both feels the pressure from our communities, but also really truly believes that there is a mass base of people all across this country and also in New York, but all across this country who are willing to really fight and make this an issue. He needs to get lots of, Senator Schumer gets contacted about all kinds of issues every single day. But what he shared with us is that he doesn't actually hear a lot of grassroots contact related to the filibuster. So we want to change that. So again, the first sort of organizing task from this meeting is making sure that you've contacted Senator Schumer, that you filled out the petition, and that you have a plan to share that out and get more folks to take that action step, because that is step number one. Step number two, I see folks asking about West Virginia and Arizona, Mansion and Cinema. And, there is a long-term game, right? They are in positions of outsized power right now because they are essentially the brokers that sit between the Democrats' agenda and the Republicans' agenda. People have asked, well, why would any Democrat not want to, do this if it's going to help them remain in power? And I think, one big piece of that is because the Democratic Party is a big tent, those core issues that we were talking about that are wildly popular with the public, but not so much with corporate campaign contributors, Medicare for all, the Fight for 15, the Green New Deal, these sorts of policies would have an easier advancement. And so we have to negotiate. The way that we build power to influence those senators is to support the groups on the ground who are building a mass base of people who can have that impact. And so in Arizona, our affiliate is Lucha, L-U-C-H-A, Lucha Arizona. And they are working on a coordinated filibuster table with other partners on the ground. The support that they need, in addition to, joining as a member, providing a monthly contribution, really is in the, organizing aspect. There are thousands of people across the state who have never heard of the filibuster. How can we help raise their capacity to have these conversations with real people on the ground? Similarly, in West Virginia Working Families Party is leading a table that is focused on how to hold Manchin accountable and how to build that broad popular support. And so investing and supporting and actually filling out those mobilized links so that you can do texts and calls for groups like Lucha and West Virginia Working Families Party are really, really critical to this fight. The last piece that you asked us about is, are there Republican senators? We have not seen, even with the Republicans that we consider to be either more vulnerable or more reasonable, we have not seen a real willingness to break ranks with the party. There are some notable exceptions. For example, our senator from Alaska, Lisa Murkowski, splitting votes on the Kavanaugh confirmation and voting against it, for example. And so we are looking at Maine and how we impact Susan Collins there. We work with Maine People's Alliance, who has a deep long-term strategy for influencing the senators from Maine. And then in Alaska, we're working with Alaska Grassroots Alliance to really work with Murkowski. But again, the way that we will have the greatest impact is to focus our attention on both making sure Schumer understands that this is a key priority for real people on the ground all across this country, by making it clear that we cannot wait, democracy cannot wait, the voice of the people cannot wait for Republicans to decide to be reasonable, that will not save us, right? And then that we support the grassroots organizations on the ground who are organizing day in and day out to hold accountable, particularly Democratic senators, but also Republican senators who are standing in the way of our progress. So those are the actions we're hoping people can take. We really believe that, Alaskans take a stand. Thank you, Julia, not Alaskans Grassroots Alliance. Alaskans take a stand. We really believe that we are in an unprecedented moment. As Adam noted, we would have never imagined 3 or 4 years ago that we would even be in the position of having this conversation, much less having, a baseline level of support from the leader of the Democratic, caucus in the Senate, or some level of support coming from the White House. So we are in a moment of opportunity, and it is up to us to take advantage of it. And I will end with this, which is to thank our incredible co-sponsors. Again, Let New York Vote, Common Cause New York, Indivisible Nation Brooklyn, True Blue New York, Empire State Indivisible, and of course, all of our affiliates at CPD Action. Look out for updates regarding next week for the People Action, where we're going to stand for HR1 and S1. And including a very cool action that we are titling Chuck the Filibuster. See what we did there? Chuck the Filibuster, which is going to be a rally outside Senator Schumer's Park Slope apartment on April 8th. And again, our goal here is to make sure that Senator Schumer is crystal clear that on the ground there is popular support in every state across this country for ending the racist Jim Crow legacy of the filibuster, and for empowering our legislators to actually govern on behalf of the people. On behalf of everyone on the call, Nsé, Maurice, Adam, and Susan and others, thank you all so much for your participation tonight. And we look forward to continuing to organize with you as we do what people may say is impossible, but what we know is necessary to build the country of our dreams.